This conversation is taking place at the DuPont Environmental Center in the Russell W. Peterson Wildlife Refuge.
We're talking today with Collin O'Mara, Delaware Secretary of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. Welcome, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, John.
I think that what's still on everybody's mind is, I'm going to marry two things. What happened last fall with Hurricane Sandy and the sort of ongoing work that's being done on sea level rise, and where these two things come together. Full disclosure, I'm on the Secretary's Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee, so just so everybody understands that's the case. Talk about what you see as DNREC's mission with sea level rise.
So I think the major part is trying to prepare Delaware for the challenges, the environmental challenges ahead, and they really do come down to these more extreme weather events, and then gradual sea level rise that we'll see impact our state, and as a low-lying state, we'll have greater impacts than pretty much any place else. And so I'm glad you kind of married the two in your question, because the investments that we make to protect ourselves from these more extreme storms that we're seeing are the same exact investments in the same exact places that are most vulnerable to sea level rise, whether that's right here at the riverfront in Wilmington or our bay beaches or the inland bays. And so we view it as our mission to make sure that the natural resources are protected in our state. A lot of the most valuable wildlife habitat and recreational amenities in our state are in these vulnerable areas, but also we believe that kind of investing in natural resources and the systems that protect those resources are also some of the best investments to protect the local communities. And we've had a long history of protecting the ocean beach communities, for example, with dunes and other types of investments.
Why should my neighbors and I give a darn about sea level rise? It will not affect me. And in fact, most people in Delaware will not be affected. There's a band along the inland bays and the ocean and the marshes that, yes, there will be inundation. But why should I care?
I mean, I think there are communities that are going to be impacted up and down the entire state. I mean, it's really not just limited to the ocean and the bay beaches, but even here in Wilmington, just right across the water in Southbridge, we'll see impacts and some other things. But I think the reason that everyone should care is that many of the things that make Delaware special, the lands protected under the coastal zone, we've been calling our bayshore region. These are areas that are vulnerable, and these are areas that provide a richness of kind of natural experiences at a scale that you don't see many places on the East Coast. And so if we aren't making some investments to protect those places, to protect our beaches, to protect some of the rural farmland, that's just a part of our history and kind of what makes Delaware special that we could lose. And these are places that many folks like to visit from our neighborhoods. And so I think it's about those kind of special places.
At what point do you look at trade-offs? Like we're going to have to deal with the potential for inundation, and if we don't do it soon, yeah, it may be 50 years away, but if we don't start working now, if we're not going to do anything worthwhile.
Well, I think we already are. And I think a lot of it comes back to the way that we've seen these storms the last few years, whether it was the nor'easters in 9 and 10 or Irene last year or Sandy. I mean, Delaware has been fortunate to not bear the brunt of a lot of these storms, but we have had impacts. And so it's really focusing on those areas that are the most vulnerable to these storms, whether it's a neighborhood in the inland bays that gets flooded out every time because they've built on wetlands, or it's a community that has a dike that's eroded. But it's really kind of focusing, kind of prioritizing in those areas, knowing that those areas are also going to provide protection for the sea level rise impacts we're planning on seeing.
One of the things that was fascinating to me as I learned more about this was that the sea level rise impact is going to be felt in Delaware, at least, more in the inland bays and the Delaware Bay and River, rather than the commercial beachfronts in Rehoboth and Dewey and so on. What's the science of that? Why is that so?
A lot of it has to do with the actual elevations and also the way that the dune systems work a little bit. Places that have the longer beaches and the higher dune systems that are kind of above kind of the projections for sea level won't see the same kind of impacts. There's also better drainage and things like that in some of those communities than other places. One thing we have found is that places that have built on wetlands and have impacted some of these other resources that actually could provide a buffer. The average acre of wetlands could provide between 300,000 million gallons of water per acre of storage. And so when you build on one to put a housing development, that water has to go somewhere else, and you lose that kind of that free that free drainage system that you had previously. And so in the inland bays and in some of the Bay Beach communities where you have simultaneous, you have some subsidence going on, we're actually sinking a little bit, you have a lot of erosion, you have inland flooding coming from the back, and then you put sea level rise on top of it. That's why you see more impacts there than some of the ocean beaches.
Switch subjects a little bit. We were talking a little while ago about DENREC's involvement in the Wilmington Garden Club's proposal to move its headquarters from DuPont Street over to Miller Road and the old Harper Thiel factory, really. What's your involvement there, from the government's point of view, and how feasible is a project like that? I happen to know something about that site. Friends of mine owned it when it was active, and it's an ugly, dirty place.
I mean, unfortunately, one of the sad parts of Delaware's industrial legacies, we have a lot of these sites. I mean, we have the NVF site up in Yorkland that we're trying to transform into a park. I mean, the Harper Thiel site's a good example. There's dozens of these. The entire riverfront. I mean, what we're looking at right now, and so. And our thought on the Harper Thiel site is that you're so close to the old Ninth Ward. You have your access to Haynes Park. You have a lot of folks. There aren't a lot of great food alternatives in that community. There's not a whole lot of community meeting spaces in that community. And so we had been having a conversation with the Center for Horticulture around maybe moving their headquarters there. The economics didn't quite work to really have that site be ready for full-blown planting and actually growing things on that former site of the electroplating of bumpers and things like that would require a significant amount of additional remediation in addition to new buildings and things like that. There are some new ideas that are floating out there that might not require as much remediation. I mean, the state's already spent $3 million to clean it up to a commercial use standard, but I'm excited that there are some folks that are still looking at trying to do something there. So whether it's DCH or another community group, there seems to be hope because it is a beautiful building. I mean, we don't have a lot of Spanish-style architecture on this coast, but there's just a lot of work to be done, and it's not going to be cheap. But if there's a vision for how it helps the community, we'll be there to help.
What's the single biggest problem that you face as DENREC secretary for the next 4 years?
At least you didn't say the next 4 minutes because there's a different problem every few minutes. I mean, I think the biggest long-term challenges facing the state really relate to water in many ways. I think we've done a good job reducing air pollution in the state. There's still more to do, but at this point, 95% of our pollutions come from out of state. We have a lot of great recreational amenities we need to improve, but too many of our waterways are impaired in the state. We have too many that have toxics levels that prevent fishing or swimming and things like that. We'll be talking more about that soon. But then the rest of it relates to storm preparedness and sea level rise. And so whether it's trying to make our water cleaner or trying to make sure communities are able to kind of live kind of coexist with the waterways that are near them in a little more sustainable way. I think that really has to be the focus because when you look at 11% of the Delaware landmass being at risk of sea level rise over the next several generations, you look at the millions of dollars of property damage we see every time there's a heavy rain, let alone any kind of extreme storm. We're very vulnerable, and it's something that we've kind of put off or had different levels of government say it's their responsibility, not ours, and it's a Delaware problem at this point. It does affect everybody.
Thank you, Collin.
Good. Thanks, John.
You're connected with Content Delaware.